Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if aiming for perfection in sports is actually good for you, or if it is just setting you up for disappointment? Well, this new study dives deep into that very question and might just change how we think about striving for greatness. Researchers have long debated whether pushing yourself to be absolutely perfect in sports is a good thing leading to awesome motivation, or if it causes all sorts of problems. For a long time, the idea was that setting really high standards, even if they're a bit unrealistic, could be beneficial. But then, it gets tricky because perfectionism also comes with the fear of mistakes and the constant feeling of not being good enough. This new research dives into whether we've been looking at this the wrong way by separating the idea of striving for excellence from the idea of striving for perfection. The researchers here used a framework called the model of Excellencism and Perfectionism, or MEP for short. Think of it like this. Excellencism is about aiming for really high but achievable standards in a determined but flexible way. It's about being the best you can be, but in a healthy way. Perfectionism, on the other hand, is about aiming for flawless, idealized standards in a relentless, all-or-nothing manner. The big idea is that these are two different things, even though they both involve high standards. The MEPI suggests that maybe what we thought was helpful about perfectionistic standards was actually just the excellencism part all along. So, to figure this out, they gathered 328 people who participate in sports. They wanted to see how two different things, excellencism and perfectionistic standards, were linked to different kinds of motivation for playing sports. Their guess or hypothesis was pretty clear. They thought excellencism would be linked to the good kinds of motivation, like doing sports because you love it or because it is important to you. They suspected that perfectionistic standards, the really tough, flawless kind of striving, would be linked to less helpful kinds of motivation, like doing sports to avoid feeling bad or because someone else is pushing you, and maybe even to a lack of motivation altogether. To do this, they got a bunch of people, 328 in total, who all enjoy playing sports. Most of them were in their mid-20s, and they came from all over, which is great because it means the results might apply to a lot of different people, not just one specific group. They also made sure these participants were currently involved in some kind of sport, whether it was a team sport or an individual one. How did they measure these things? Well, they used a special questionnaire called the SCOPE to measure both excellencism and perfectionistic standards. Think of it as a way to ask questions like, how much do you strive to be a perfect person? Versus, how much do you strive to be a competent person? And to understand motivation, they used another scale called the BRACS. This scale breaks down motivation into 6 types based on a theory called self-determination theory. We've got the super good stuff like intrinsic motivation, which is doing something just because you love it, and integrated motivation, where the activity is a big part of who you are. Then there is identified motivation, where you do it because it aligns with your important personal goals. On the other hand, there is introjected motivation, which is like doing it to avoid guilt or shame, and external motivation, where you are driven by rewards or to avoid punishment. And finally, a motivation, which is when you just don't feel motivated at all, or you don't know why you are doing it. After they collected all this information, they crunched the numbers. For the more positive types of motivation, intrinsic, integrated, and identified they used standard statistical methods. But for the less positive types like introjected, external, and amotivation, things were a bit different. They found that most people reported very low levels of these, meaning the data looked really lopsided. So for these, they used a specialized statistical approach called zero-inflated negative binomial structural equation modeling. Essentially, it is a fancy way to handle data where there are a lot of zeros or very low scores, and it helps them understand both the why behind having a 0 score and the how much if they do have a score. Now for the exciting part, what did they actually find when it came to the good stuff? The autonomous motivations, the results were pretty clear and consistent with their hunches. Excellencism, that healthy striving for high but achievable standards, was a strong positive predictor of intrinsic motivation, integrated motivation, and identified motivation. This means that people who are high in excellencism are more likely to love what they do, feel it is part of their identity, and see it as important for their goals. Here is the kicker: perfectionistic standards. The relentless pursuit of flawlessness was basically unrelated to these positive motivations, once they accounted for excellencism. This is huge because it suggests that the positive links we sometimes see between perfectionistic standards and good motivation in other studies might actually be due to the excellencism part, not the perfectionism part itself. When they looked at different types of people based on their scores, they found that excellence strivers, those high in excellencism and low in perfectionistic standards, had higher autonomous motivation than those who weren't really aiming for excellence or perfection. But here is the really telling part: perfection strivers, those high in both excellencism and perfectionistic standards, did not have significantly more autonomous motivation than excellence strivers. This means that adding that extra layer of perfectionistic striving didn't boost their positive motivation any further. So what about the less desirable motivations? Things got really interesting here. Interestingly, neither excellencism nor perfectionistic standards were linked to the amount of introjected external or a motivation someone reported. This means that having high standards, whether excellent or perfectionistic, didn't necessarily make people report more of these negative motivations in terms of sheer quantity. However, when they looked at the probability of reporting zero of these negative motivations, excellencism shone through again. Higher excellencism was linked to a higher probability of not reporting introjected motivation, not reporting external motivation, and not reporting a motivation. In simpler terms, people with high excellencism were less likely to feel guilt or shame, less likely to feel pressured by external rewards or punishments, and less likely to feel unmotivated. Now, for perfectionistic standards, this is where it gets a bit more complicated, but also very telling. The probability of having zero external motivation was negatively associated with perfectionistic standards. This means that people with high perfectionistic standards were less likely to have no external motivation. In other words, they were actually more likely to engage in sports out of external reasons, like winning rewards or avoiding consequences. And for a motivation, perfectionistic standards showed a trend towards being linked to a lower probability of having zero motivation, meaning perfection strivers might be slightly more prone to feeling unmotivated than excellence strivers. So, what does all this mean? The big takeaway is that the old way of thinking about perfectionistic standards as universally good for motivation in sports might be flawed. When you properly distinguish between excellencism, the healthy pursuit of high goals, and perfectionistic standards, the relentless chase for flawlessness excellencism is the clear winner for fostering autonomous motivation. Excellencism is linked to doing sports because you genuinely enjoy it, because it is part of your identity, and because it aligns with your important goals. It also seems to act as a shield, making you less likely to engage in sports out of guilt, external pressure, or a feeling of purposelessness. On the flip side, while perfectionistic standards didn't boost autonomous motivation beyond what excellencism already provided, it did seem to have some downsides. Perfection strivers were more likely to be driven by external factors, which the research suggests can have negative consequences for persistence and overall well-being in sports. The researchers are essentially saying that past studies, which often didn't make this crucial distinction, might have misinterpreted their results. They might have seen a link between perfectionistic standards and good motivation, but it was likely the excellencism component that was actually driving those positive outcomes. This study strongly suggests that coaches, athletes, and parents should focus on fostering excellencism. It's about promoting a mindset of striving for your best, learning from mistakes, and enjoying the process, rather than aiming for an unattainable ideal of perfection. Now, like all studies, this one has its limits. The biggest one is that it was cross-sectional. This means they looked at things at one point in time. They can tell us that excellencism and certain motivations tend to go hand in hand, but they can't definitively say that excellencism causes those motivations. It is a bit like seeing that ice cream sales and crime rates both go up in the summer. They're correlated. But one doesn't directly cause the other. The heat is likely the underlying factor. Future research would need to follow people over time or even do experiments to prove cause and effect. Another limitation is that they focus specifically on motivation. It would be fascinating to see if excellencism also leads to better performance, more enjoyment, less burnout, and greater overall well-being in athletes compared to perfectionistic standards. Also, the study participants were mostly recreational athletes. People who play sports for fun might have different motivations than elite professional athletes. So it would be good to see if these findings hold true for competitors at higher levels too. They also used a specific questionnaire for motivation. And while it is a good one, using different measurement tools in future studies could help confirm these findings. Overall, this research offers a really valuable and nuanced perspective. It suggests that when it comes to sports motivation, striving for excellence is the way to go. It is associated with genuine enjoyment and commitment, without the emotional baggage that often comes with chasing perfection. While aiming for high standards is good, the relentless, Flawless pursuit of perfection seems to be unnecessary at best and potentially detrimental to a healthy and sustained engagement in sports. So, let's encourage excellencism and maybe let go of the pressure to be absolutely perfect. It is like the difference between a master craftsman honing their skills to produce beautiful work and someone who obsesses over the tiniest imperceptible flaw, to the point it paralyzes them. The craftsman finds joy and uses their skills to create, while the perfectionist might never finish anything and be miserable doing it. This research is particularly exciting because it offers practical advice for athletes and coaches. It tells us to focus on performance, improvement, and the journey rather than an impossible ideal. Future research could explore how to effectively train athletes to shift from perfectionistic tendencies to excellencism, and what specific outcomes like injury rates or career longevity are impacted by these different striving styles. So, what do you think about this distinction between excellencism and perfectionism? Does it resonate with your own experiences in sports or other areas of your life? Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this deep dive into sports psychology. Give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future MindLab explorations. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.